My father, whom I have informed of my plans, has made it an express condition that the marriage should not take place for a year. That, too, I meant to speak of to you," said Prince Andrei. "It is true that Natasha is very young, but so long as that?" "It could not be helped," said Prince Andrei with a sigh. "I will send her to you," said the Countess, and she went out of the room. "Lord, have mercy upon us," she kept repeating, as she looked for her daughter. Sonia told her that Natasha was in her bedroom. She was sitting on her bed, with a pale face and dry eyes. She was gazing at the holy picture, and murmuring something to herself, as she rapidly crossed herself. Seeing her mother, she leaped up and flew towards her. "Well, mamma? Well?" "Go to him. He asks your hand," said the Countess, coldly it seemed to Natasha. "Yes, go," the mother murmured mournfully and reproachfully, with a deep sigh, as her daughter ran off. Natasha could not have said how she reached the drawing-room. As she entered the door and caught sight of him, she stopped short. "Is it possible that this stranger has now become everything to me?" she asked herself, and instantly answered, "Yes, everything. He alone is dearer to me now than everything in the world." Prince Andrei approached her with downcast eyes. "I have loved you from the first minute I saw you. Can I hope?" He glanced at her, and was struck by the serious, impassioned look in her face. Her face seemed to say, "Why ask? Why doubt of what you cannot but know? Why talk, when no words can express what one feels?" She came nearer to him and stopped. He took her hand and kissed it. "Do you love me?" "Yes, yes," said Natasha, almost angrily it seemed. She drew a deep sigh, and another. Her breathing came more and more quickly, and she burst into sobs. "What is it? What's the matter?" "Oh, I am so happy," she answered, smiling through her tears. She bent over closer to him, thought a second, as though wondering whether it were possible, and then kissed him. Prince Andrei held her hands, looked into her eyes, and could find no trace of his former love for her in his heart. Some sudden reaction seemed to have taken place in his soul. There was none of the poetic and mysterious charm of desire left in it. Instead of that, there was pity for her feminine and childish weakness, terror at her devotion and trustfulness, an irksome yet sweet sense of duty, binding him to her forever. The actual feeling, though not so joyous and poetical as the former feeling, was more serious and deeper. "Did your mamma tell you that it cannot be for a year?" said Prince Andrei, still gazing into her eyes. "Can this be I, the baby girl, as everyone used to call me?" Natasha was thinking. "Can I really be from this minute a wife, on a level with this unknown, charming, intellectual man, who is looked up to even by my father? Can it be true? Can it be true that now there can be no more playing with life, that now I am grown up, that now a responsibility is laid upon me for every word and action? Oh, what did he ask me?" "No," she answered, but she had not understood his question. "Forgive me," said Prince Andrei, "but you are so young, and I have had so much experience of life. I am afraid for you. You don't know yourself." Natasha listened with concentrated attention, trying to take in the meaning of his words, but she did not understand them. "Hard as that year will be to me, delaying my happiness," continued Prince Andrei, "in that time you will be sure of yourself. I beg you to make me happy in a year, but you are free. Our engagement shall be kept a secret, and if you should find out that you do not love me, or if you should come to love—" said Prince Andrei with a forced smile. "Why do you say that?" Natasha interrupted. "You know that from the very day when you first came to Otradnoy, I have loved you," she said, firmly persuaded that she was speaking the truth. "In a year, you will learn to know yourself." "A whole year?" cried Natasha suddenly, only now grasping that their marriage was to be deferred for a year. "But why a year? Why a year?" Prince Andrei began to explain to her the reasons for this delay. Natasha did not hear him. "And can't it be helped?" she asked. Prince Andrei made no reply, but his face expressed the impossibility of altering this decision. "That's awful! Oh, it's awful! Awful!" Natasha cried suddenly, and she broke into sobs again. "I shall die if I have to wait a year. It's impossible. It's awful." She glanced at her lover's face, and saw the look of sympathetic pain and perplexity on it. No, I'll do anything," she said, suddenly checking her tears. "I'm so happy." Her father and mother came into the room and gave the betrothed couple their blessing. From that day, Prince Andrei began to visit the Rostovs as Natasha's affianced lover. Chapter 24. There was no formal betrothal, and no announcement was made of the engagement of Bolkonsky and Natasha. Prince Andrei insisted upon that. He said that since he was responsible for the delay of their marriage, he ought to bear the whole burden of it. He said that he was bound forever by his word, but that he did not want to bind Natasha, and would leave her perfect freedom. If, in another 6 months, she were to feel that she did not love him, she would have the perfect right to refuse him. It need hardly be said that neither Natasha nor her parents would hear of this possibility, but Prince Andrei insisted on having his own way. Prince Andrei came every day to the Rostovs, but he did not behave with Natasha as though he were engaged to her. He addressed her formally and kissed only her hand. From the day of his proposal, Prince Andrei's relations with Natasha had become quite different from what had existed between them before. Their relations were simple and intimate. It seemed as though till then they had not known each other. Both loved to recall how they had regarded one another when they were nothing to each other. Now they both felt utterly different creatures, then affected, now simple and sincere. At first there had been a feeling of awkwardness in the family in regard to Prince Andrei. He seemed a man from another world, and Natasha used for a long while to try and make her people understand Prince Andrei, and declared to everyone with pride that he only seemed to be so different, that he was really like everyone else, and that she was not afraid of him, and no one need be. After a few days, the rest of the family got accustomed to seeing him, and went on without constraint with their usual manner of life, in which he took part. He knew how to talk to the Count about the management of his estates, to the Countess and Natasha about dress, and to Sonia about her album and embroidery. Sometimes the Rostovs among themselves, and in Prince Andrei's presence, expressed their wonder at the way it had all happened, and at the events that obviously betokened that it was to be. Prince Andrei's coming to Otrodnoe, their coming to Petersburg, and the resemblance between Natasha and Prince Andrei, which the old nurse had remarked on Prince Andrei's first visit, and the meeting in 1805 between Andrei and Nikolai, and many other incidents betokening that it was to be, were observed by the family. The house was full of that poetic atmosphere of dullness and silence which always accompanies the presence of an engaged couple. Often as they all sat together everyone was silent. Sometimes the others got up and went away, and the engaged pair were still as mute when they were left alone. Rarely they spoke of their future life together. Prince Andrei felt frightened and ashamed to speak of it. Natasha shared the feeling, as she did all his feelings, which she never failed to divine. Once Natasha began questioning him about his son. Prince Andrei blushed, a thing frequent with him at that time, which Natasha particularly liked to see, and said that his son would not live with them. "Why not?" said Natasha, taking fright. "I cannot take him from his grandfather, and then—" "How I should have loved him," said Natasha, at once divining his thought. "But I know you want to avoid any pretext for our being blamed." The old Count sometimes came up to Prince Andrei, kissed him, and asked his advice about some question relating to Petya's education or Nikolai's position. The old Countess sighed as she looked at them. Sonia was afraid every instant of being in their way, and was always trying to find excuses for leaving them alone, even when they had no wish to be alone. When Prince Andrei talked, he described things very well, Natasha listened to him with pride. When she talked, she noticed with joy and dread that he watched her with an intent and scrutinizing look. She asked herself in perplexity, "What is it he seeks in me? What is it he is probing for with that look? What if I haven't in me what he is searching for in that look?" Sometimes she fell into the mood of wild gaiety characteristic of her, and then she particularly loved to see and hear how Prince Andrei laughed. He rarely laughed, but when he did laugh, he abandoned himself utterly to his mirth, and she always felt herself drawn closer to him by this laughter. Natasha would have been perfectly happy if the thought of the separation before her, coming closer and closer, had not terrified her. He, too, turned pale and cold at the mere thought of it. On the day before he was to leave Petersburg, Prince Andrei brought with him Pierre, who had not been at the Rostovs since the day of the ball. Pierre seemed absent-minded and embarrassed. He talked chiefly to the Countess. Natasha was sitting at the chessboard with Sonia, and invited Prince Andrei to join them. He went to them. "You have known Betsuhov a long while, haven't you?" he asked. "Do you like him?" "Yes, he's very nice, but very absurd." And she began, as people always did when speaking of Pierre, to tell anecdotes of his absent-mindedness, anecdotes which were made up, indeed, about him. "You know, I have confided our secret to him," said Prince Andrei. "I have known him from childhood. He has a heart of gold. I beg you, Natalie," he said, with sudden seriousness, "I am going away. God knows what may happen. You may change. Oh, I know I ought not to speak of that. Only one thing. If anything were to happen to you, while I am away—" "What could happen?" "If any trouble were to come," pursued Prince Andrei, "I beg you, Mademoiselle Sophie, if anything were to happen, to go to him, and no one else, for advice and help. He is a most absent-minded and eccentric person, but he has the truest heart." Neither her father nor her mother, neither Sonia nor Prince Andrei could have foreseen the effect of the parting on Natasha. She wandered about the house all that day, flushed, excited, and tearless, busying herself about the most trivial matters, as though she had no notion of what was before her. She did not weep even at the moment when he kissed her hand for the last time. "Don't go away," was all she said, in a voice that made him wonder whether he ought not really to remain, and that he remembered long after. When he had gone, she still did not weep, but for several days she sat in her room, not crying, but taking no interest in anything, and only saying from time to time, "Oh, why did he go?" But a fortnight after his departure, she surprised those around her equally by recovering from her state of spiritual sickness, and became herself again, only with a change in her moral physiognomy, such as one sees in the faces of children after a long illness. Chapter 25. The health and character of Prince Nikolai Andreevich Bolkonsky had, during that year, after his son had left him, grown considerably feebler. He became more irritable than ever, and it was Princess Maria who, as a rule, bore the brunt of his outbursts of causeless fury. He seemed studiously to seek out all the tender spots in her consciousness so as to inflict on her the cruelest wounds possible. Princess Maria had two passions and consequently two joys, her nephew, Nikolushka, and religion, and both were favorite subjects for the old prince's attacks and jeers. Whatever was being spoken of, he would bring the conversation round to the superstitiousness of old maids, or the petting and spoiling of children. You want to make him, Nikolushka, just such another old maid as you are yourself. Prince Andrei wants a son, and not an old maid, he would say. Or addressing Mademoiselle Bourienne, he would ask her, before Princess Maria, how she liked our village priests and holy pictures, and make jests about them. He was constantly wounding Princess Maria's feelings, but his daughter needed no effort to forgive him. Could he be to blame in anything he did to her? Could her father, who, as she knew in spite of it all, loved her, be unjust? And indeed, what is justice? Princess Maria never gave a thought to that proud word, justice. All the complex laws of humanity were summed up for her in one clear and simple law, the law of love and self-sacrifice, laid down by him who had in his love suffered for humanity, though he was God himself. What had she to do with the justice or injustice of other people? All she had to do was suffer and to love, and that she did. In the winter, Prince Andrei had come to Bleak Hills, had been gay, gentle, and affectionate, as Princess Maria had not seen him for years. She felt that something had happened to him, but he said nothing to his sister of his love. Before his departure, Prince Andrei had a long conversation with his father, and Princess Maria noticed that they were ill-pleased with each other at parting. Soon after Prince Andrei had gone, Princess Maria wrote from Bleak Hills to her friend in Petersburg, Julie Karagin, whom Princess Maria had dreamed, as girls always do dream, of marrying to her brother. She was at this time in mourning for the death of her brother, who had been killed in Turkey. Sorrow, it seems, is our common lot, my sweet and tender friend Julie. Your loss is so terrible that I can only explain it to myself as a special sign of the grace of God, who in his love for you would chasten you and your incomparable mother. Ah, my dear, religion and religion alone can, I don't say comfort us, but save us from despair. Religion alone can interpret to us what, without its aid, man cannot comprehend. To what end, for what cause, good, elevated beings, who are able to find happiness in life, not injuring others, but indispensable to their happiness, are called away to God, while the wicked, the useless, injuring others and a burden to themselves and others, are left living. The first death which I have seen, and which I shall never forget, the death of my dear little sister-in-law, made on me just the same impression. Just as you question destiny, and ask why your noble brother had to die, so did I wonder what reason there was for that angel Liza to die, who had never done the slightest harm to anyone, never even had a thought in her heart that was not kind. And yet, do you know, dear friend, 5 years have passed since then, and even I, with my poor intelligence, begin now to understand clearly why it was needful she should die, and in what way that death was but an expression of the boundless grace of the Creator, all of whose acts, though for the most part we comprehend them not, are but manifestations of his infinite love for his creatures. Perhaps, I often think, she was of too angelic an innocence to have the force to perform all a mother's duties. As a young wife, she was irreproachable. Possibly she could not have been equally so as a mother. As it is, not only has she left us, and particularly Prince Andrei, the purest memories and regrets, but there she is, in all likelihood, receiving a place for which I dare not hope for myself. But not to speak of her alone, that early and terrible death has had the most blessed influence on me and on my brother, in spite of all our grief. All the time, at the moment of our loss, I could not have entertained such thoughts. At that time I should have dismissed them in horror, but now it seems clear and incontestable. I write all this to you, dear friend, simply to convince you of the gospel truth, which has become a principle of life for me. Not one hair of our head falls without his will, and the guiding principle of his will is only his infinite love for us, and so whatever may befall us, all is for our good. You ask whether we shall spend next winter in Moscow. In spite of all my desire to see you, I do not expect and do not wish to do so. And you will be surprised to hear that Bonaparte is responsible for this. I will tell you why. My father's health is noticeably weaker. He cannot endure contradiction and is easily irritated. This irritability is, as you are aware, most readily aroused on political subjects. He cannot endure the idea that Bonaparte is treating on equal terms with all the sovereigns of Europe, especially our own, the grandson of the great Catherine. As you know, I take absolutely no interest in politics, but from my father and his conversations with Mikhail Ivanovitch, I know all that goes on in the world, and have heard of all the honors conferred on Bonaparte. It seems that Bleak Hills is now the only spot on the terrestrial globe where he is not recognized as a great man, still less as Emperor of France. My father cannot tolerate this state of things. It seems to me that my father shows a disinclination for the visit to Moscow, chiefly owing to his political views, and his foreseeing the difficulties likely to arise from his habit of expressing his opinions freely, with no regard for anyone. All that he would gain from medical treatment in Moscow, he would lose from the inevitable discussions upon Bonaparte. In any case, the matter will very soon be settled. Our home life goes on in its old way, except for the absence of my brother André. As I wrote to you before, he has greatly changed of late. It is only of late, during this year, that he seems to have quite recovered from the shock of his loss. He has become again just as I knew him as a child, good-natured, affectionate, with a heart such as I know in no one else. He feels now, it seems to me, that life is not over for him. But, together with this moral change, he has become very weak physically. He is thinner than ever, and more nervous. I feel anxious about him, and am glad that he is taking this tour abroad, which the doctors prescribed long ago. I hope that it will cure him. You write to me that he is spoken of in Petersburg as one of the most capable, cultivated, and intellectual young men. Forgive me for the pride of family. I never doubted it. The good he did here to everyone, from his peasants to the local nobility, is incalculable. When he went to Petersburg, he was received as he deserved. I wonder at the way reports fly from Petersburg to Moscow, and especially such groundless ones as the rumor you wrote to me about, of my brother's supposed engagement to the little Rostov girl. I don't imagine that André will ever marry anyone at all, and certainly not her, and I will tell you why. In the first place, I know that though he rarely speaks of his late wife, the grief of his loss has penetrated too deeply into his heart for him ever to be ready to give her a successor, and our little angel a stepmother. Secondly, because, as far as I can ascertain, that girl is not one of the kind of women who would attract my brother André. I do not believe that André has chosen her for his wife, and I will frankly confess I should not wish for such a thing. But now I have been running on. I am finishing my second sheet. Farewell, my sweet friend, and may God keep you in his holy and mighty care. My dear companion, Mademoiselle Bourrienne, sends you kisses. Marie. Chapter 26. In the middle of the summer, Princess Maria, to her surprise, received a letter from Prince André, who was in Switzerland. In it, he told her strange and surprising news. He informed his sister of his engagement to the younger Rostov. His whole letter was full of loving enthusiasm for his betrothed, and tender and confiding affection for his sister. He wrote that he had never loved as he loved now, and that it was only now that he saw all the value and meaning of life. He begged his sister to forgive him for having said nothing of his plans to her on his last visit to Bleak Hills, though he had spoken of it to his father. He had said nothing to her for fear Princess Maria would beg her father to give his consent, and without attaining her object, would irritate her father and draw all the weight of his displeasure upon herself. The matter was not, however, then, he wrote to her, so completely settled as now. At that time our father insisted on a delay of a year, and now 6 months, half of the period specified, is over, and I remain firmer than ever in my resolution. If it were not for the doctors keeping me here at the waters, I should be back in Russia myself, but as it is, I must put off my return for another 3 months. You know me and my relations with our father. I want nothing from him. I have been, and always shall be, independent. But to act in opposition to his will, to incur his anger, when he has perhaps not long left to be with us, would destroy half my happiness. I am writing a letter to him now, and I beg you to choose a favorable moment to give him the letter, and to let me know how he looks at the whole matter, and if there is any hope of his agreeing to shorten the year by 3 months. After long hesitations, doubts, and prayers, Princess Maria gave the letter to her father. The next day the old prince said to her calmly, "Write to your brother to wait till I'm dead. He won't have long to wait. I shall soon set him free." The princess tried to make some reply, but her father would not let her speak, and went on, getting louder and louder. "Let him marry. Let him marry, the dear fellow. A nice connection. Clever people, eh? Rich, eh? Oh, yes. A fine stepmother for Nikolushka she'll make. You write him he can marry her tomorrow. Nikolushka shall have her for a stepmother, and I'll marry little Bourien. Ha, 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 ha! And so he shall have a stepmother too. Only there's one thing. I won't have any more womenfolk about my house. He may marry and go and live by himself. Perhaps you'll go and live with him too." He turned to Princess Maria. "You're welcome to, and good luck to you." After this outburst, the prince did not once allude to the subject again. But his repressed anger at his son's poor-spirited behavior found a vent in his treatment of his daughter. He now added to his former subjects for jeering and annoying her a new one, allusions to a stepmother, and gallantries to Mademoiselle Bourien. "Why shouldn't I marry her?" he would say to his daughter. "A capital princess she will make." And latterly, to her perplexity and amazement, Princess Maria began to notice that her father was really beginning to attach himself more and more closely to the Frenchwoman. Princess Maria wrote to Prince Andrei and told him how their father had taken the letter, but comforted her brother with hopes that he would become reconciled to the idea. Nikolushka and his education, her brother Andrei, and religion were Princess Maria's joys and consolations. But apart from those, since everyone must have personal hopes, Princess Maria cherished, in the deepest secrecy of her heart, a hidden dream and hope that was the source of the chief comfort in her life. This comforting dream and hope was given her by God's folk, the crazy prophets and the pilgrims who visited her without the prince's knowledge. The longer Princess Maria lived, the more experience and observation she had of life, the more she wondered of the short-sightedness of men, who seek here on earth for enjoyment, toil, suffer, strive, and do each other harm, to attain that impossible, visionary, and sinful happiness. Prince Andrei had loved a wife. She died. That was not enough for him. He wanted to bind his happiness to another woman. Her father did not want that, because he coveted a more distinguished or a wealthier match for Andrei. And they were all striving and suffering and in torment, and sullying their souls, their eternal souls, to attain a bliss the duration of which was but a moment. Not only do we know that for ourselves. Christ, the Son of God, came down upon earth and told us that this life is but for a moment, is but a probation, yet we still cling to it and think to find happiness in it. How is it no one has realized that? Princess Maria wondered. No one but these despised people of God who, with wallets over their shoulders, come to me by the back stairs, afraid of the prince catching sight of them, and not from fear of ill usage, but from fear of tempting him to sin, to leave home and country, give up all thoughts of worldly blessings, and clinging to nothing, to wander from place to place in a homespun smock under a different name, doing people no harm, but praying for them, praying equally for those who drive them away and those who succor them. Higher than that truth and that life, there is no truth and no life. There was one pilgrim woman, Fedosyushka, a quiet little woman of about 50, marked by smallpox, who had been wandering for over 30 years barefooted and wearing chains. Princess Maria was particularly fond of her. One day, when sitting in a dark room, by the light only of the lamp before the holy picture, Fedosyushka told her about her life. Princess Maria felt all at once so strongly that Fedosyushka was the only person who had found the right way of life, that she resolved to go on a pilgrimage herself. When Fedosyushka had gone to bed, Princess Maria pondered a long while over it, and at last made up her mind that, however strange it might be, she must go on a pilgrimage. She confided her intention to no one but a monk, Father Ankinfi, and this priest approved of her project. On the pretense of getting presents for pilgrim women, Princess Maria had prepared for herself the complete outfit of a pilgrim, a smock, plaited shoes, a full-skirted coat, and a black kerchief. Often she went to her secret wardrobe, where she kept them, and stood in uncertainty whether the time to carry out her plan had come or not. Often, as she listened to the pilgrims' tales, their simple phrases, that had become mechanical to them, but were to her ears full of the deepest significance, worked upon her till she was several times ready to throw up everything and run away from home. In imagination she already saw herself with Fedosyushka in a coarse smock, trudging along the dusty road with her wallet and her staff, going on her pilgrimage, free from envy, free from earthly love, free from all desires, from one saint to another, and at last thither where there is neither sorrow nor sighing, but everlasting joy and blessedness. I shall come to one place, I shall pray there, and before I have time to grow used to it, to love it, I shall go on further, and I shall go on till my legs give way under me, and I lie down and die somewhere, and reach at last that quiet, eternal haven, where is neither sorrow nor sighing, thought Princess Maria. But then at the sight of her father, and still more of little Nikolushka, she wavered in her resolution, wept in secret, and felt that she was a sinner, that she loved her father and her nephew more than God. Part 4. Chapter 1. The biblical tradition tells us that the absence of work, idleness, was a condition of the first man's blessedness before the fall. The love of idleness has remained the same in fallen man, but the curse still lies heavy upon man, and not only because in the sweat of our brow we must eat bread, but because from our moral qualities we are unable to be idle and at peace. A secret voice tells us that we must be to blame for being idle. If a man could find a state in which while being idle he could feel himself to be of use and to be doing his duty, he would have attained to one side of primitive blessedness. And such a state of obligatory and irreproachable idleness is enjoyed by a whole class, the military class. It is in that obligatory and irreproachable idleness that the chief attraction of military service has always consisted, and will always consist. Nikolai Rostov was enjoying this blessed privilege to the full, as after the year 1807 he remained in the Pavlograd regiment, in command of the squadron that had been Denisov's. Rostov had become a bluff, good-natured fellow, who would have been thought rather bad form by his old acquaintances in Moscow, though he was loved and respected by his comrades, his subordinates, and his superior officers, and was well content with his life. Of late, in the year 1809, He had found more and more frequently in letters from home complaints on the part of his mother that their pecuniary position was going from bad to worse, and that it was high time for him to come home, to gladden and comfort the hearts of his old parents. As he read those letters, Nikolai felt a pang of dread at their wanting to drag him out of the surroundings in which, by fencing himself off from all the complexities of existence, he was living so quietly and peacefully. He felt that sooner or later he would have to plunge again into that whirlpool of life, with many difficulties and business to attend to, with the steward's accounts, with quarrels and intrigues and ties, with society, with Sonia's love and his promise to her. All that was terribly difficult and complicated, and he answered his mother's letters with cold letters in French on the classic model, beginning "Ma chère maman," and ending "Votre obéissant fils," saying nothing of any intention of coming home. In 1810, he received letters from home in which he was told of Natasha's engagement to Bolkonsky, and of the marriage being deferred for a year, because the old prince would not consent to it. This letter chagrined and mortified Nikolai. In the first place, he was sorry to be losing from home Natasha, whom he cared more for than all the rest of the family. Secondly, from his hussar point of view, he regretted not having been at home at the time, as he would have shown this Bolkonsky that it was by no means such an honor to be connected with him, and that if he cared for Natasha, he could get on just as well without his crazy old father's consent. For a moment he hesitated whether to ask for leave, so as to see Natasha engaged, but then the maneuvers were just coming on, and thoughts of Sonia, of complications, recurred to him, and again he put it off. But in the spring of the same year he got a letter from his mother, written without his father's knowledge, and that letter decided him. She wrote that if Nikolai did not come and look after things, their whole estate would have to be sold by auction, and they would all be beggars. The Count was so weak, put such entire confidence in Mitenka, and was so good-natured, and everyone took advantage of him, so that things were going from bad to worse. I beseech you, for God's sake, to come at once, if you don't want to make me and all your family miserable, wrote the Countess. That letter produced an effect on Nikolai. He had that common sense of mediocrity which showed him what was his duty. His duty now was, if not to retire from the army, at least to go home on leave. Why he had to go, he could not have said, but, after his after-dinner nap, he ordered his grey mare to be saddled, a terribly vicious beast that he had not ridden for a long while. He returned home with his horse in a lather, and told Lavrushka, he had kept on Denisov's old valet, and the comrades who dropped in that evening, that he had applied for leave and was going home. It was strange and difficult for him to believe that he was going away without hearing from the staff whether he had been promoted to be a captain, or had received the St. Anne for the last manoeuvres, a matter of the greatest interest to him. It was strange to him to think of going away like this, without having sold Count Golohovsky his 3 roan horses, over which the Polish Count was haggling with him. Rostov had taken a bet that he would get 2,000 for them. It seemed inconceivable that without him the ball could take place, which the hussars were to give in honor of their favorite Polish belle, Madame Pshazdetsky, to outdo the Uhlans, who had given a ball to their favorite belle, Madame Borzhozovsky. Yet he knew he must leave this world, where all was well and all was clear, to go where all was nonsensical and complicated. A week later his leave came. His comrades, not only in the regiment, but throughout the whole brigade, gave Rostov a dinner that cost a subscription of 15 rubles a head. 2 bands of musicians played, 2 choruses sang. Rostov danced the trepak with Major Bazov. The drunken officers tossed him in the air, hugged him, dropped him. The soldiers of the 3rd Squadron tossed him once more and shouted hurrah. Then they put Rostov in a sledge and escorted him as far as the first posting station on his way. For the first half of the journey, from Kremenchug to Kiev, All Rostov's thoughts, as is apt to be the case with travelers, turned to what he had left behind, to his squadron. But after being jolted over the first half of the journey, he had begun to forget his 3 roans and his quartermaster Dozhoyeveiki, and was beginning to wonder uneasily what he should find on reaching Otradnoy. The nearer he got, the more intense, far more intense, were his thoughts of home, as though moral feeling were subject to the law of acceleration in inverse ratio with the square of the distance. At the station nearest to Otradnoy, he gave the sledge-driver a tip of 3 rubles, and ran breathless up the steps of his home like a boy. After the excitement of the first meeting, and the strange feeling of disappointment after his expectations, the feeling that, "It's just the same, why was I in such a hurry?" Nikolai began to settle down in his old world of home. His father and mother were just the same, only a little older. All that was new in them was a certain uneasiness, and at times a difference of opinion, which he had never seen between them before, and soon learned to be due to the difficulties of their position. Sonia was now nearly 20. She would grow no prettier now. There was no promise in her of more to come, but what she had was enough. She was brimming over with love and happiness as soon as Nikolai came home, and this girl's faithful, steadfast love for him gladdened his heart. Petya and Natasha surprised Nikolai more than all the rest. Petya was a big, handsome lad of 13, whose voice was already cracking. He was full of gaiety and clever pranks. Nikolai did not get over his wonder at Natasha for a long while, and laughed as he looked at her. "You're utterly different," he told her. "How? Uglier?" "No, quite the contrary. But what dignity! A real princess," he whispered to her. "Yes, yes, yes," cried Natasha gleefully. Natasha told him all the story of Prince Andrei's love-making, of his visit to Otradnoy, and showed him his last letter. "Well, are you glad?" asked Natasha. "I'm so at peace and happy now." "Very glad," answered Nikolai. "He's a splendid fellow. Are you very much in love, then?" "How shall I say?" answered Natasha. "I was in love with Boris, with our teacher, with Denisov, but this is utterly different. I feel calm, settled. I know there is no one better than he in the world, and so I am calm now and content. It's utterly different from anything before." Nikolai expressed his dissatisfaction at the marriage being put off for a year. But Natasha fell on him with exasperation, proving to him that no other course was possible, that it would be a horrid thing to enter a family against the father's will, and that she would not consent to it herself. "You don't understand at all, she kept saying. Nikolai paused a moment, and then said he agreed with her. Her brother often wondered as he looked at her. It seemed quite incredible that she was a girl in love and parted from her betrothed lover. She was even-tempered, serene, and quite as light-hearted as ever. This made Nikolai wonder, and look on the engagement to Bolkonsky rather skeptically. He could not believe that her fate was by now sealed, especially as he had never seen her with Prince Andrei. It still seemed to him that there was something not real in this proposed marriage. Why this delay? Why were they not formally betrothed? He thought. Once, in talking to his mother about his sister, he found to his surprise, and partly to his satisfaction, that at the bottom of her heart his mother sometimes regarded the marriage as skeptically as he did. Once, in talking to his mother about his sister, he found to his surprise, and partly to his satisfaction, that at the bottom of her heart his mother sometimes regarded the marriage as skeptically as he did. "Here, you see, he writes," she said, showing her son a letter from Prince Andrei with that latent feeling of grudge which mothers always have in regard to their daughter's happiness in marriage. "He writes that he won't be coming before December. What can it be that keeps him? Illness, no doubt. His health is very weak. Don't tell Natasha. Don't make a mistake, because she seems in good spirits. It's the last she has of her girlhood, and I know how she is when she gets his letters. Still, God grant, all may be well yet, she always concluded. He's a splendid fellow. Chapter 2. In the early part of his time at home, Nikolai was serious and even dull. He was worried by the necessity of meddling in the stupid business matters, which his mother had sent for him to look after. To be rid of this burden as soon as possible, on the third day after his return, he marched angrily off, making no reply to inquiries where he was going, with scowling brows entered Mitenka's lodge, and demanded from him an account in full. What he meant by an account in full, Nikolai knew even less than the panic-stricken and bewildered Mitenka. The conversation and Mitenka's accounts did not last long. The village elder, the deputy, and the village clerk, waiting in the entry of the lodge, heard with awe and delight, at first the booming and snapping of the young count's voice in a constantly ascending scale, then terrible words of abuse, flung one after another. "Robber! Ungrateful brute! I'll thrash the dog! Not papa to deal with! Plundering us!" and so on. Then, with no less awe and delight, these persons saw the young count, with a red face and bloodshot eyes, dragging Mitenka out by the collar, kicking him with great dexterity at every appropriate moment between his words, and shouting, "Away with you! Never let me set eyes on you, blackguard!" Mitenka flew head-first down 6 steps, and ran to the shrubbery. This shrubbery was well known as a haven of refuge for delinquents at Otradnoy. Mitenka had, on coming home drunk from the town, himself hidden in the shrubbery, and many of the residents of Otradnoy had been indebted to the saving power of the shrubbery when anxious to conceal themselves from Mitenka. Mitenka's wife and sister-in-law, with frightened faces, peeped into the passage from the door of their room, where was a bright samovar boiling, and the bailiff's high bedstead stood under a quilted patchwork coverlet. The young count walked by, treading resolutely and breathing hard, taking no notice of them, and went into the house. The countess heard at once through her maids of what had been happening in the lodge, and on one side was comforted by the reflection that now their position would be sure to improve, though on the other hand she was uneasy as to the effect of the scene on her son. She went several times on tiptoe to his door, and listened as he lighted one pipe after another. The next day the old count drew his son on one side, and with a timid smile said to him, "But you know, my dear boy, you had no reason to be so angry. Mitenka has told me all about it." "I knew," thought Nikolai, "that I should never make head or tail of anything in this crazy world." "You were angry at his not having put down these 708 roubles, but you see they were carried forward by double entry, and you didn't look at the next page." "Papa, he's a blackguard and a thief, I am certain, and what I have done I have done. But if you don't wish it, I will say nothing to him." "No, my dear boy." The old count was confused. He was conscious that he had mismanaged his wife's estate, and had wronged his children, but he had no notion how to rectify his position. "No, I beg you to go into things. I am old. No, papa. Forgive me if I have done what you dislike. I know less about it than you do. Damn them all, these peasants and money matters and double entries," he thought. "I used once to understand scoring at cards, but book-keeping by double entry is quite beyond me," he said to himself, and from that time he did not meddle further with the management of the family affairs. But one day the countess called her son into her room, told him that she had a promissory note from Anna Mihalovna for 2,000 roubles, and asked Nikolai what he thought it best to do about it. "Well," answered Nikolai, "you say that it rests with me. I don't like Anna Mihalovna, and I don't like Boris, but they were our friends, and they were poor. So that's what I would do." And he tore up the note, and by so doing made the Countess sob with tears of joy. After this, young Rostov took no further part in business of any sort, but devoted himself with passionate interest to everything to do with the chase, which was kept up on a great scale on the old Count's estate. Chapter 3. Wintry weather was already setting in. The morning frosts hardened the earth, drenched by the autumn rains. Already the grass was full of tufts, and stood out bright green against the patches of brown winter cornland trodden by the cattle, and the pale yellow stubble of the summer cornfields, and the reddish strips of buckwheat. The uplands and copses, which at the end of August had still been green islands among the black fields ploughed ready for winter corn, and the stubble, had become golden and lurid red islands in a sea of bright green autumn crops. The grey hare had already half changed its coat. The fox's cubs were beginning to leave their parents, and the young wolves were bigger than dogs. It was the best time of the year for the chase. The dogs of an ardent young sportsman like Rostov were only just coming into fit state for hunting, so that at a common council of the huntsmen it was decided to give the dogs 3 days' rest, and on the 16th of September to go off on a hunting expedition, beginning with Dubravy, where there was a litter of wolves that had never been hunted. Such was the position of affairs on the 14th of September. All that day the dogs were kept at home. It was keen and frosty weather, but towards evening the sky clouded over, and it began to thaw. On the morning of the 15th of September, when young Rostov in his dressing-gown looked out of window, he saw a morning which was all the heart could desire for hunting. It looked as though the sky were melting, and without the slightest wind, sinking down upon the earth. The only movement in the air was the soft downward motion of microscopic drops of moisture or mist. The bare twigs in the garden were hung with transparent drops, which dripped onto the freshly fallen leaves. The earth in the kitchen garden had a gleaming, wet, black look, like the center of a poppy, and at a short distance away it melted off into the damp, dim veil of fog. Nikolai went out onto the wet and muddy steps. There was a smell of decaying leaves and dogs. The broad-backed, black and tan bitch Milka, with her big, prominent black eyes, caught sight of her master, got up, stretched out her hind legs, lay down like a hare, then suddenly jumped up and licked him right on his nose and moustache. Another harrier, catching sight of his master from the bright-colored path, arched its back, darted headlong to the steps, and, lifting its tail, rubbed itself against Nikolai's legs. "Ahoy!" He heard at that moment the inimitable hunting hullo which unites the deepest bass and the shrillest tenor notes. And round the corner came the huntsman and whipper-in, Danilo, a grey, wrinkled man, with his hair cropped round in the Ukrainian fashion. He held a bent whip in his hand, and his face had that expression of independence and scorn for everything in the world, which is only to be seen in huntsmen. He took off his Circassian cap to his master and looked scornfully at him. That scorn was not offensive to his master. Nikolai knew that this Danilo, disdainful of all and superior to everything, was still his man and his huntsman. "Danilo," said Nikolai, at the sight of this hunting weather, those dogs, and the huntsman, feeling shyly that he was being carried away by that irresistible sporting passion in which a man forgets all his previous intentions, like a man in love at the sight of his mistress. "What is your bidding, your Excellency?" asked a bass voice, fit for a head deacon, and hoarse from hallooing, and a pair of flashing black eyes glanced up from under their brows at the silent young master. "Surely you can't resist it." those two eyes seemed to be asking. "It's a good day, eh? Just right for riding and hunting, eh?" said Nikolai, scratching Milka behind the ears. Danilo winked and made no reply. "I sent Uvarka out to listen at daybreak." His bass boomed out after a moment's silence. "He brought word she's moved into the Otradnoy enclosure. There was howling there." "She's moved" meant that the mother wolf, of whom both knew, had moved with her cubs into the Otradnoy copse, which was a small hunting preserve about 2 versts away. "Shouldn't we go, eh?" said Nikolai. "Come to me with Uvarka." "As you desire." "Then put off feeding them." "Yes, sir." 5 minutes later, Danilo and Uvarka were standing in Nikolai's big study. Although Danilo was not tall, to see him in a room gave one an impression such as one has on seeing a horse or bear standing on the floor among the furniture and surroundings of human life. Danilo felt this himself, and as usual he kept close to the door and tried to speak more softly, and not to move for fear of causing some breakage in the master's apartments. He did his utmost to get everything said quickly, so as to get as soon as might be out into the open again, from under a ceiling out under the sky. After making inquiries and extracting from Danilo an admission that the dogs were fit, Danilo himself was longing to go. Nikolai told them to have the horses saddled. But just as Danilo was about to go, Natasha, wrapped in a big shawl of her old nurse's, ran into the room, not yet dressed, and her hair in disorder. Petya ran in with her. "Are you going?" said Natasha. "I knew you would. Sonia said you weren't going. I knew that on such a day you couldn't help going." "Yes, we're going," Nikolai answered reluctantly. As he meant to attempt serious hunting, he did not want to take Natasha and Petya. "We are going, but only wolf hunting. It will be dull for you." "You know that it's the greatest of my pleasures," said Natasha. "It's too bad. He's going himself, has ordered the horses out, and not a word to us." "No hindrance bars a Russian's path," declaimed Petya. "Let's go." "But you mustn't. You know, Mamma said you were not to," said Nikolai to Natasha. "No, I'm going. I must go," said Natasha stoutly. "Danilo, bid them saddle my horse, and tell Mihailo to come with my leash," she said to the huntsman. Simply to be in a room seemed irksome and unfitting to Danilo, but to have anything to do with a young lady he felt to be utterly impossible. He cast down his eyes and made haste to get away, making as though it were no affair of his, and trying to avoid accidentally doing some hurt to the young lady. Chapter 4. The old Count, whose hunting establishment had always been kept up on a large scale, had now handed it all over to his son's care, but on that day, the 15th of September, being in excellent spirits, he prepared to join the expedition. Within an hour the whole party was before the porch. When Natasha and Petya said something to Nikolai, he walked by them with a stern and serious air, betokening that he had no time to waste on trifles. He looked over everything to do with the hunt, sent a pack of hounds and huntsmen on ahead to cut off the wolf from behind, got on his chestnut dawn horse, and whistling to the dogs of his leash, he set off across the threshing floor to the field leading to the Otradnoy preserve. The old Count's horse, a sorrel gelding, with a white mane and tail, called Viflyanka, was led by the Count's groom. He was himself to drive straight in a light gig to the spot fixed for him to stand. 54 hounds were led out under the charge of 6 whippers-in and grooms. Of huntsmen, properly speaking, there were taking part in the hunt 8 men besides the members of the family, and more than 40 greyhounds ran behind them, so that with the hounds in leashes there were about 130 dogs and 20 persons on horseback. Every dog knew its master and its call. Every man in the hunt knew his task, his place, and the part assigned him. As soon as they had passed beyond the fence, they all moved without noise or talk, lengthening out along the road and the field to the Otradnoy forest. The horses stepped over the field as over a soft carpet, splashing now and then into pools as they crossed the road. The foggy sky still seemed falling imperceptibly and regularly down on the earth. The air was still and warm, and there was no sound but now and then the whistle of a huntsman, the snort of a horse, the clack of a whip, or the whine of a dog who had dropped out of his place. When they had gone a verst, 5 more horsemen, accompanied by dogs, appeared out of the mist to meet the Rostovs. The foremost of them was a fresh, handsome old man with large grey moustaches. "Good day, uncle," said Nikolai, as the old man rode up to him. "All's well and march? I was sure of it," began the man addressed as uncle. He was not really the Rostovs' uncle, but a distant relative who had a small property in their neighborhood. "I was sure you couldn't resist it, and a good thing you have come out. All's well and quick march." This was the uncle's favorite saying. "You had better attack the preserve at once, for my Girchik brought me word that the Ilagins are out with their hounds at Korniki. They'll snatch the litter right under your noses." "That's where I'm going. Shall we join the packs?" asked Nikolai. The hounds were joined into one pack, and the uncle and Nikolai rode on side by side. Natasha, muffled up in a shawl which did not hide her eager face and shining eyes, galloped up to them, accompanied by Petya, who kept beside her, and Mikhailo, the huntsman and groom, who had been told to look after her. Petya was laughing and switching and pulling his horse. Natasha sat her raven Arabchik with grace and confidence, and controlled him with an easy and steady hand. The uncle looked with disapproval at Petya and Natasha. He did not like a mixture of frivolity with the serious business of the hunt. "Good day, uncle. We're coming to the hunt too," shouted Petya. Good day, and mind you don't ride down the dogs," said the uncle sternly. "Nikolenka, what a delightful dog Trunila is! He knew me," said Natasha of her favorite dog. "In the first place, Trunila's not a dog but a wolf-hound," thought Nikolai. He glanced at his sister, trying to make her feel the distance that lay between them at that moment. Natasha understood it. "Don't imagine we shall get in anybody's way, uncle," said Natasha. "We'll stay in our right place and not stir from it." "And you'll do well, little countess," said the uncle. "Only don't fall off your horse," he added, "or you'll never get on again. All's well, quick march." The Otradnoy preserve came into sight, an oasis of greenness, 250 yards away. Rostov, settling finally with the uncle from what point to set the dogs on, pointed out to Natasha the place where she was to stand, a place where there was no chance of anything running out, and went round to close in from behind above the ravine. "Now, nephew, you're on the track of an old wolf," said the uncle. "Mind he doesn't give you the slip." "That's as it happens," answered Rostov. "Karai, hey!" he shouted, replying to the uncle's warning by this call to his dog. Karai was an old, misshapen, muddy-colored hound, famous for attacking an old wolf unaided. All took their places. The old count, who knew his son's ardor in the hunt, hurried to avoid being late, and the whippers-in had hardly reached the place when Count Ilya Andreich, with a cheerful face and flushed and quivering cheeks, drove up with his pair of raven horses over the green field to the place left for him. Straightening his fur coat and putting on his hunting appurtenances, he mounted his sleek, well-fed, quiet, good-humored Vivlyanka, who was turning grey like himself. The horses with the gig were sent back. Count Ilya Andreich, though he was at heart no sportsman, knew well all the rules of sport. He rode into the edge of the thicket of bushes, behind which he was standing, picked up the reins, settled himself at his ease in the saddle, and, feeling that he was ready, looked about him smiling. Near him stood his valet, Semyon Chekmar, a veteran horseman, though now heavy in the saddle. Chekmar held on a leash 3 wolfhounds of a special breed, spirited hounds, though they too had grown fat like their master and his horse. 2 other keen old dogs were lying beside them, not in a leash. 100 paces further, in the edge of the copse, stood another groom of the Count's, Mitka, a reckless rider and passionate sportsman. The Count had followed the old custom of drinking before hunting a silver goblet of spiced brandy. He had had a slight lunch, and after that half a bottle of his favorite Bordeaux. Count Ilya Andreich was rather flushed from the wine and the drive. His eyes, covered by moisture, were particularly bright, and sitting in the saddle wrapped up in his fur coat, he looked like a baby taken out for a drive. After seeing after his duties, Chekmar, with his thin face and sunken cheeks, looked towards his master, with whom he had lived on the best of terms for 30 years. Perceiving that he was in a genial humor, he anticipated a pleasant chat. A third person rode circumspectly, he had no doubt been cautioned, out of the wood, and stood still behind the Count. This personage was a grey-bearded old man, wearing a woman's gown and a high, peaked cap. It was the buffoon, Nastasia Ivanovna. "Well, Nastasia Ivanovna," whispered the Count, winking at him, "you only scare off the game, and Danilo will give it you." "I wasn't born yesterday," said Nastasia Ivanovna. "Shh!" hissed the Count, and he turned to Semyon. "Have you seen Natalia Ilyinichna?" he asked Semyon. "Where is she?" "Her honor's with Pyotr Ilyich, behind the high grass at Javry," answered Semyon, smiling. "Though she is a lady, she has a great love for the chase." "And you wonder at her riding, Semyon, eh?" said the Count. "For a man even it wouldn't be amiss." "Who wouldn't wonder? So daring, so smart." "And where's Nikolasha? Above the Lyadovsky upland, eh?" the Count asked, still in a whisper. "Yes, sir. His honor knows where he had best stand. He knows the ins and outs of hunting, so that Danilo and I are sometimes quite astonished at him," said Semyon, who knew how to please his master. "He's a good, clever sportsman, eh? And what do you say to his riding, eh?" "A perfect picture he is. How he drove the fox out of the Zavarzhinsky thicket the other day! He galloped down from the ravine. It was a sight. The horse worth 1,000 roubles, and the rider beyond all price. Yes, you would have to look a long while to find his match." "To look a long while," repeated the Count, obviously regretting that Semyon's praises had come to so speedy a termination. "A long while," he repeated, turning back the skirt of his coat and looking for his snuff-box. "The other day they were coming out from Mass in all their glory. Mikhail Sidorich—" Semyon stopped short, hearing distinctly in the still air the rush of the hounds, with no more than 2 or 3 dogs giving tongue. With his head on one side, he listened, shaking a warning finger at his master. "They're on the scent of the litter," he whispered. "They have gone straight toward Lyadovsky upland." The Count, with a smile still lingering on his face, looked straight before him along the path, and did not take a pinch from the snuff-box he held in his hand. The hound's cry was followed by the bass note of the hunting cry for a wolf, sounded on Danilo's horn. The pack joined the first 3 dogs, and the voices of the hounds could be heard in full cry, with a peculiar note which serves to betoken that they are after a wolf. The whippers-in were not now hallooing, but urging on the hounds with cries of "Loo! Loo! Loo!" And above all the voices rose the voice of Danilo, passing from a deep note to piercing shrillness. Danilo's voice seemed to fill the whole forest, to pierce beyond it, and echo far away in the open country. After listening for a few seconds in silence, the Count and his groom felt certain that the hounds had divided into two packs. One, the larger, was going off into the distance, in particularly hot cry. The other part of the pack was moving along the forest past the Count, and it was with this pack that Danilo's voice was heard, urging the dogs on. The sounds from both packs melted into unison and broke apart again, but both were getting further away. Semyon sighed and stooped down to straighten the leash, in which a young dog had caught his leg. The Count too sighed, and, noticing the snuff-box in his hand, he opened it and took a pinch. "Back!" cried Semyon to the dog, which had poked out beyond the bushes. The Count started and dropped the snuff-box. Nastasya Ivanovna got off his horse and began picking it up. The Count and Semyon watched him. All of a sudden, as so often happens, the sound of the hunt was in an instant close at hand, as though the baying dogs and Danilo's cries were just upon them. The Count looked round, and on the right he saw Mitka, who was staring at the Count with eyes starting out of his head. Lifting his cap, he pointed in front to the other side. "Look out!" he shouted in a voice that showed the words had long been fretting him to be uttered, and letting go the dogs, he galloped towards the Count. The Count and Semyon galloped out of the bushes, and on their left they saw a wolf. With a soft, rolling gait, it moved at a slow amble further to their left into the very thicket in which they had been standing. The angry dogs whined, and pulling themselves free from the leash, flew by the horse's hooves after the wolf. The wolf paused in his flight. Awkwardly, like a man with a quinsy, he turned his heavy-browed head towards the dogs, and still with the same soft, rolling gait, gave one bound and a second, and waving its tail, disappeared into the bushes. At the same instant, with a cry like a wail, there sprang desperately out of the thicket opposite one hound, then a second and a third, and all the pack flew across the open ground towards the very spot where the wolf had vanished. The bushes were parted behind the dogs, and Danilo's brown horse, dark with sweat, emerged from them. On its long back Danilo sat perched up and swaying forward. He had no cap on his grey hair, that fluttered in disorder above his red, perspiring face. "Loo! Loo! Loo!" he was shouting. When he caught sight of the Count, there was a flash like lightning in his eyes. "B!" he shouted, using a brutally coarse term of abuse, and menacing the Count with his lifted whip. "Let the wolf slip. Sportsman indeed!" And as though scorning to waste more words on the confused and frightened Count, he lashed the moist and heavy sides of his brown gelding with all the fury that had been ready for the Count, and flew off after the dogs. The Count stood like a man who has been thrashed, looking about him and trying to smile and call for Semyon to sympathize with his plight. But Semyon was not there. He had galloped round to cut the wolf off from the forest. The greyhounds, too, were running to and fro on both sides. But the wolf got off into the bushes, and not one of the party succeeded in coming across him. Chapter 5. Nikolai Rostov was standing meanwhile at his post, waiting for the wolf. He was aware of what must be taking place within the copse from the rush of the pack coming closer and going further away, from the cries of the dogs, whose notes were familiar to him, from the nearness, and then greater remoteness, and sudden raising of the voices of the huntsmen. He knew that there were both young and also old wolves in the enclosure. He knew the hounds had divided into two packs, that in one place they were close on the wolf, and that something had gone wrong. Every second he expected the wolf on his side. He made 1,000 different suppositions of how and at what spot the wolf would run out, and how he would set upon it. Hope was succeeded by despair. Several times he prayed to God that the wolf would rush out upon him. He prayed with that feeling of passion and compunction with which men pray in moments of intense emotion due to trivial causes. "Why, what is it to thee," he said to God, "to do this for me? I know thou art great, and that it's a sin to pray to thee about this. But for God's sake do make the old wolf come out upon me, and make Kare fix his teeth in his throat, and finish him before the eyes of uncle, who is looking this way." 1,000 times over in that half-hour, with intent, strained, and uneasy eyes, Rostov scanned the thickets at the edge of the copse, with 2 scraggy oaks standing up above the undergrowth of aspen, and the ravine with its overhanging bank, and uncle's cap peeping out from behind a bush on the right. "No, that happiness is not to be," thought Rostov. "Yet what would it cost him? It's not to be. I'm always unlucky, at cards, in war, and everything." Austerlitz and Dolohov flashed in distinct but rapid succession through his imagination. "Only once in my life to kill an old wolf. I ask for nothing beyond," he thought, straining eyes and ears, looking from left to right and back again, and listening to the slightest fluctuations in the sounds of the dogs. He looked again to the right, and saw something running across the open ground towards him. "No, it can't be," thought Rostov, taking a deep breath, as a man does at the coming of what he has long been hoping for. The greatest piece of luck had come to him, and so simply, without noise, or flourish, or display to signalize it. Rostov could not believe his eyes, and this uncertainty lasted more than a second. The wolf was running forward. He leaped clumsily over a rut that lay across his path. It was an old wolf, with a grey back and full reddish belly. He was running without haste, plainly feeling secure of being unseen. Rostov held his breath and looked round at the dogs. They were lying and standing about, not seeing the wolf and quite unaware of him. Old Kare had his head turned round, and was angrily searching for a flea, snapping his yellow teeth on his haunches. "Lou! Lou! Lou!" Rostov whispered, pouting out his lips. The dogs leaped up, jingling the iron rings of the leashes, and pricked up their ears. Kare scratched his hind leg and got up, pricking up his ears and wagging his tail, on which there were hanging matted locks of his coat. Loose them, or not loose them? Nikolai said to himself as the wolf moved away from the copse towards him. All at once the whole physiognomy of the wolf was transformed. He started, seeing, probably for the first time, human eyes fixed upon him, and, turning his head a little towards Rostov, stood still, in doubt whether to go back or forward. Never mind, forward, the wolf seemed to be saying to himself, and he pushed on ahead, without looking round, softly and not rapidly, with an easy but resolute movement. "Lou! Lou!" Nikolai cried in a voice not his own, and of its own accord his gallant horse galloped at breakneck pace downhill, and leaped over the watercourse to cut off the wolf's retreat. The hounds dashed on even more swiftly, overtaking it. Nikolai did not hear his own cry. He had no consciousness of galloping. He saw neither the dogs nor the ground over which he galloped. He saw nothing but the wolf, which, quickening its pace, was bounding in the same direction across the glade. Foremost of the hounds was the black and tan, broad-backed bitch, Milka, and she was getting close upon him. But the wolf turned a sidelong glance upon her, and instead of flying at him, as she always had done, Milka suddenly stopped short, her forelegs held stiffly before her, and her tail in the air. "Lou! Lou! Lou!" shouted Nikolai. The red hound, Lyubima, darted forward from behind Milka, dashed headlong at the wolf, and got hold of him by the hind leg, but in the same second bounded away on the other side in terror. The wolf crouched, gnashed its teeth, rose again, and bounded forward, followed at a couple of yards' distance by all the dogs. They did not try to get closer. "He'll get away." "No, it's impossible," thought Nikolai, still shouting in a husky voice. "Karai! Lou! Lou!" He kept shouting, looking for the old hound, who was his one hope now. Karai, straining his old muscles to the utmost, and watching the wolf intently, was bounding clumsily away from the beast to cut across his path in front of him. But it was plain from the swiftness of the wolf's course and the slowness of the hounds that Karai was out in his reckoning. Nikolai saw the copse not far now ahead of him. If once the wolf reached it, he would escape to a certainty. But in front, dogs and men came into sight, dashing almost straight towards the wolf. There was still hope. A long young hound, not one of the Rostovs, Nikolai did not recognize him, flew from in front straight at the wolf, and almost knocked him over. The wolf got up again with a surprising rapidity, and flew at the young hound. His teeth clacked, and the hound, covered with blood from a gash in his side, thrust its head in the earth, squealing shrilly. "Karai! Old man!" Nikolai wailed. The old dog, with the tufts of matted hair quivering on his haunches, had succeeded, thanks to the delay, in cutting across the wolf's line of advance, and was now 5 paces in front of him. The wolf stole a glance at Karai, as though aware of his danger, and, tucking his tail further between his legs, he quickened his pace. But then Nikolai could only see that something was happening with Karai. The hound had dashed instantly at the wolf, and had rolled in a struggling heap with him into the watercourse before them. The moment when Nikolai saw the dogs struggling with the wolf in the watercourse, saw the wolf's grey coat under them, his outstretched hind leg, his head gasping in terror, and his ears turned back, Karai had him by the throat. The moment when Nikolai saw all this was the happiest moment of his life. He had already grasped the pommel of his saddle to dismount and stab the wolf, when suddenly the beast's head was thrust up above the mass of dogs. Then his forelegs were on the bank of the watercourse. The wolf clacked his teeth. Karai had not hold of his throat now, leaped with his hind legs out of the hollow, and with his tail between his legs pushed forward, getting away from the dogs again. Karai, his hair starting up, had difficulty in getting out of the watercourse. He seemed to be bruised or wounded. "My God! Why is this?" Nikolai shouted in despair. The uncle's huntsman galloped across the line of the wolf's advance from the other side, and again his hounds stopped the wolf. Again he was hemmed in. Nikolai, his groom, the uncle, and his huntsman pranced about the beast with shouts and cries of "Loo," every minute on the point of dismounting when the wolf crouched back, and dashing forward again every time the wolf shook himself free and moved towards the copse, where his safety lay. At the beginning of this onset, Danilo, hearing the hunter's cries, had darted out of the copse. He saw that Karai had hold of the wolf and checked his horse, supposing the deed was done. But seeing that the hunters did not dismount from their horses, and that the wolf was shaking himself free, and again making his escape, Danilo galloped his own horse, not towards the wolf, but in a straight line towards the copse, to cut him off, as Karai had done. Thanks to this maneuver, he bore straight down on the wolf when the uncle's dogs had a second time fallen behind him. Danilo galloped up in silence, holding a drawn dagger in his left hand, and thrashing the heaving sides of his chestnut horse with his riding whip, as though it were a flail. Nikolai neither saw nor heard Danilo, till his panting chestnut darted close by him, and he heard the sound of a falling body, and saw Danilo lying in the midst of the dogs on the wolf's back, trying to get him by the ears. It was obvious to the dogs, to the hunters, and to the wolf that all was over now. The beast, its ears drawn back in terror, tried to get up, but the dogs clung to him. Danilo, as he got up, stumbled, and as though sinking down to rest, rolled with all his weight on the wolf, and snatched him by the ears. Nikolai would have stabbed him, but Danilo whispered, "Don't. We will string him up." And shifting his position, he put his foot on the wolf's neck. They put a stick in the wolf's jaws, fastened it, as it were bridling him with a leash, and tied his legs. Danilo swung the wolf twice from side to side. With happy, exhausted faces, They tied the great wolf alive on a horse, that started and snorted in alarm at it, and with all the dogs trooping after and whining at the wolf, they brought it to the place where all were to meet. The wolf-hounds had captured 2 cubs, and the greyhounds 3. The party met together to show their booty and tell their stories, and everyone went to look at the big wolf, which, with its heavy-browed head hanging downward and the stick in its teeth, gazed with its great glassy eyes at the crowd of dogs and men around it. When they touched him, his fastened legs quivered, and he looked wildly and yet simply at all of them. Count Ilya Andreich too went up and touched the wolf. "Oh, what a great beast!" he said. "He's an old one, eh?" he asked Danilo, who was standing near him. "That he is, Your Excellency," answered Danilo, hurriedly taking off his cap. The Count remembered the wolf he had let slip and Danilo's outburst. "You have a hot temper, though, my man," said the Count. Danilo said nothing, but he shyly smiled a smile of childlike sweetness and amiability. Chapter 6. The old Count went home. Natasha and Petya promised to follow immediately. The hunting party went on further, as it was still early. In the middle of the day they set the hounds into a ravine covered with thickly growing young copse. Nikolai, standing on the stubble land above, could see all his party. Facing Nikolai on the opposite side was a field of green corn, and there stood his huntsman, alone in a hollow behind a nut bush. As soon as they loosed the hounds, Nikolai heard a hound he knew, Voltorn, give tongue at intervals. Other hounds joined him, pausing now and then, and taking up the cry again. A moment later he heard from the ravine the cry that they were on the scent of a fox, and all the pack joining together made for the opening towards the green corn away from Nikolai. He saw the whippers-in their red caps galloping along the edge of the overgrown ravine. He could see the dogs even, and was every instant expecting the fox to come into sight on the further side among the green corn. The huntsman, standing in the hollow, started off and let his dogs go, and Nikolai saw the red, uncouth-looking fox hurrying along close to the ground, with its bushy tail, through the green corn. The dogs bore down on it, and now they were getting close, and now the fox was beginning to wind in circles between them, making the circles more and more rapidly, and sweeping its bushy brush around it, when all of a sudden a strange white dog flew down upon it, and was followed by a black one, and everything was in confusion, and the dogs formed a star-shaped figure around it, scarcely moving, with their heads together and their tails out. 2 huntsmen galloped down to the dogs, one in a red cap, the other, a stranger, in a green coat. "What's the meaning of it?" wondered Nikolai. "Where did that huntsman spring from? That's not Uncle's man." The huntsman got the fox, and remained a long while standing on foot there, without hanging the fox on the saddle. He could see the horses with their snaffles jutting up, standing close by the huntsman, and the dogs lying down. The huntsmen were waving their arms and doing something with the fox. A horn was sounded, the signal agreed upon in case of a dispute. "That's Ilagin's huntsman, getting up a row of some sort with our Ivan," said Nikolai's groom.